The leaky cauldron smelled of old wood and breakfast grease, with something else underneath, something that tingled at the edge of awareness, like the air before a thunderstorm. Albus Potter pressed closer to his father's side as they wove through the crowded pub, past witches in travelling cloaks and wizards reading the morning's daily prophet. His mother's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, a warm anchor in the chaos of voices and clattering dishes. "Nervous?" Ginny asked, her voice carrying the hint of a smile. Albus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His throat felt tight, his new school list crumpled in his pocket from being checked and rechecked since they'd left Grimmauld Place that morning. Around him, the pub buzzed with similar families, children clutching parchment lists, parents exchanging knowing glances, the air thick with anticipation and the ghosts of similar mornings from years past. Near the back corner, Hermione Granger Weasley stood with her daughter Rose, who was already making notes on her copy of the supply list. Ron hovered nearby, one hand on Hugo's shoulder, the other holding what appeared to be his third cup of tea. Rose's bushy hair, so like her mother's, was pulled back in a sensible braid, and her brown eyes scanned the list with fierce concentration. "Mum, it says we need the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, but I have read that there's a supplementary edition with additional chapters on—" "Rose, darling, let's get the required texts first," Hermione said gently, though her eyes shone with unmistakable pride. Across the room, standing slightly apart from the morning rush, Draco Malfoy adjusted his son's collar for the third time. Scorpius Malfoy, pale-haired and grey-eyed, his face a softer version of his father's, stood very still, his gaze fixed on the families around them. His expression was carefully neutral, but his fingers worried at the edge of his robes. "Stop fidgeting," Draco murmured, but his hand lingered on his son's shoulder, protective rather than corrective. Astoria Malfoy touched her husband's arm lightly. "He's allowed to be nervous, Draco. It's a big day." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with all the things left unsaid. How different this morning was from Draco's own first trip to Diagon Alley. How much the world had changed. How desperately they wanted Scorpius's experience to be softer than their own. Harry caught Draco's eye across the pub. For a moment, the two men simply looked at each other. Not quite friends, but no longer enemies. Fathers now, bound by the vulnerability of watching their children step into a world they knew could be both wonderful and terrible. Draco gave a slight nod. Harry returned it. "Right then," Harry said, his voice cutting through Albus's spiraling thoughts. "Ready?" Albus looked up at his father, Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the man whose story everyone knew, and saw only the gentle creases at the corners of his eyes, the slight grey threading through his black hair, the small scar above his eyebrow from a Quidditch accident years ago. Just Dad, who made terrible pancakes and told even worse jokes and still occasionally woke from nightmares he never talked about. "What if—" Albus started, but Harry squeezed his shoulder. "The alley's been there for centuries. It'll still be there in 5 minutes. And," he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I was terrified my first time too. Hagrid had to practically drag me through." "Really? Really?" Harry smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger. "Come on, let's not keep magic waiting." They moved as a group toward the back of the pub, the Potters, the Weasleys, and yes, the Malfoys too, though they maintained a respectful distance. Tom the innkeeper, ancient and gap-toothed, nodded at Harry as they passed, the same nod he'd given a frightened 11-year-old boy decades ago. The courtyard was small and enclosed by high walls, unremarkable except for the single trash bin and the jumble of weeds growing from the cobblestones. To any muggle who might have accidentally wandered back here, it would seem like a dead end, a forgotten space good only for storing rubbish. But Albus could feel it now, that tingle in the air growing stronger, more insistent. Magic pressing against the edges of the ordinary world, waiting. Harry drew his wand, and Albus caught his breath. He'd seen his father perform magic countless times, lighting fires, mending broken toys, conjuring flowers for Ginny. But this felt different, ceremonial. The same gesture made by countless parents for countless children. A threshold crossed, a door opened. 3 up, Harry said softly, more to himself than anyone else. 2 across. The wand tip touched the brick wall. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then the brick quivered. It rippled like water disturbed by a stone, and the ripple spread outward in concentric circles. The bricks began to slide aside, rearranging themselves with a soft grinding sound that somehow managed to be both mechanical and organic, deliberate and alive. They folded back on themselves, revealing the darkness beyond. And then, suddenly, light. Sunlight spilled over ancient cobblestones, warm and golden and impossible. The archway stood open, and beyond it stretched a street that shouldn't exist, a slice of impossible wedged into the ordinary London morning. Albus gasped. He couldn't help it. The sound escaped him along with the breath he'd been holding, a soft exhalation of pure wonder that was echoed by Rose beside him and, more quietly, by Scorpius beyond her, Diagon Alley. The name had been whispered to him in bedtime stories, described in his parents' reminiscences, built up in his imagination until it had become almost mythical. But nothing, no story, no description, no imagining, had prepared him for this. The street stretched before them, narrow and winding, disappearing around corners that promised more wonders beyond. Buildings leaned at impossible angles, their upper stories jutting out over the cobblestones, creating a patchwork of shadow and sunlight. Shop windows glittered with displays that defied logic, books that appeared to be reading themselves, cauldrons that bubbled with rainbow smoke, owls that watched passers-by with unsettling intelligence. The air itself seemed different here, thicker somehow, textured with magic and possibility. It smelled of parchment and potion ingredients, of old stone and new bread from the bakery down the way, of owl feathers and the metallic tang that lingered around spellwork. And underneath it all, a scent like ozone, like the moment before lightning strikes, the smell of magic itself, concentrated and ancient and alive. People moved along the street in robes of every color, emerald and midnight blue, deep purple and scarlet red. Witches carried shopping bags that bobbed along behind them like trained pets. Wizards stood in clusters, arguing animatedly about Quidditch scores and ministry policies. Children darted between adults' legs, shrieking with laughter as they chased each other toward the distant shape of Gringotts. "Oh," Rose breathed, her scholarly composure cracking. Her eyes were wide, her list temporarily forgotten as she took in the scene before them. "Oh, Mum, look at everything." Hermione laughed, but her own eyes were suspiciously bright. "I know, sweetheart. I remember." Ron slipped his hand into hers, and they stood there for a moment, two people who'd been here before, who'd walked these stones in another life when the world was darker and their futures uncertain. But they'd made it through. They'd survived. And now they could give this wonder, this magic, this possibility to their children. Scorpius had gone very still beside his mother. His grey eyes reflected the sunlight spilling through the archway, making them almost silver. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at the alley with an expression that was part hunger, part fear, part desperate hope. Astoria's hand found his, laced their fingers together. "It's real," she whispered. "All of it. And you belong here just as much as anyone." The words seemed to reach him. His shoulders dropped slightly, some tension releasing, though his eyes never left the street beyond. Ginny stepped forward first, her movements easy and confident. She'd grown up with magic, had never known a world without it, and Diagon Alley was as familiar to her as breathing. But even she paused at the threshold, glanced back at Albus with a smile that held all the warmth of summer. "Come on then," she said. "The alleys waited long enough." Harry took Albus's hand. When had it become so small, Harry wondered. When had his son gotten so big? And together, they stepped through the archway. The sensation was subtle, but unmistakable, like passing through a curtain of warm water. The air changed, temperature, pressure, quality. The sounds of Muggle London, car engines, sirens, the distant rumble of the underground, cut off as though someone had closed a door. They were replaced by the distinct soundscape of magical commerce, the clink of galleons, the hoot of owls, snatches of conversation about potions marks and transfiguration essays, a street performer charming roses to bloom and wither in endless cycles. Albus's feet touched the cobblestones, and something inside him shifted, settled, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. This was real. Magic was real. Not just in the abstract, not just in the stories and the evidence around their house, his father's wand, his mother's broomstick, Uncle Ron's deluminator. But here, tangible and immediate, a whole world that existed alongside the ordinary one, hidden but never quite gone. He looked up at his father and found Harry watching him with an expression Albus didn't quite understand yet. Something that was part nostalgia, part pride, part grief for the innocence about to be complicated by the reality of magic. Because magic was wonderful, yes, but it was also difficult and demanding and sometimes dangerous, and Harry knew that better than most. "All right?" Harry asked quietly. Albus nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. "I don't. It's just, I know." Harry squeezed his hand. "The first time's always the hardest. After this, it gets easier. Not less magical, just easier to believe." Rose had already pulled out her list and was consulting it with fierce determination, her earlier awe channeled into the practical task of planning their route. "If we go to Gringotts first, then work our way back toward the leaky cauldron, we can maximize efficiency and—" "Rose," Ron interrupted gently. "Maybe we just wander a bit first. Take it in." Hermione shot him a grateful look. For all her love of planning and preparation, she remembered what it felt like to be 11 and new to this world, when every shop window held a revelation, and efficiency was the enemy of wonder. The families began to move forward together, though they naturally separated into smaller groups, the Potters drawing closer, the Weasleys clustering around Rose, the Malfoys maintaining their careful distance. But they were here, all of them, in this place that had survived dark wizards and war, that had been broken and rebuilt, that had welcomed generations of witches and wizards and would welcome generations more. Albus walked close to his father, his eyes darting from shop to shop, trying to take in everything at once. A witch hurried past, carrying a cage of purple toads. A wizard argued with a shopkeeper about the price of dragonhide gloves. A cat, or was it, watched from a windowsill, its eyes too knowing for an ordinary animal. Beside him, just a few feet away, Rose had stopped trying to plan and had simply surrendered to wonder, her mouth slightly open as she stared at a display of self-stirring cauldrons. And beyond her, walking with his parents through sunlight and shadow, Scorpius Malfoy allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The alley hummed with life around them, buying and selling, greeting and gossiping, the ordinary magic of commerce and community. But underneath that, Albus could sense something else, a watching quality, a waiting. The stones themselves seemed aware, seemed to recognize that something had shifted. A new generation had arrived, stepping into the story, carrying the weight of their parents' choices and the freedom of their own futures. Ginny glanced at Hermione, and in that look passed a lifetime of shared history, battles fought, friends lost, a world saved one small act of courage at a time. Then they looked at their children, and their expressions softened into hope. "Where first?" Harry asked, and his voice was steady despite the catch Albus heard underneath. "Books," Rose said immediately. "Robes," Ginny suggested. "Wands," Scorpius whispered, so quietly that only his mother heard, but she smiled and nodded. "All of it," Hermione said, laughing. "One step at a time, just like we did." And so they began to walk deeper into Diagon Alley, into the heart of the wizarding world, into the next chapter of a story that had no ending, only transformations. The morning light painted the cobblestones gold, and somewhere ahead, Flourish and Blotts waited with its thousands of books. Ollivanders stood ready to match children with wands, and the future hung suspended like snow about to fall. Behind them, the brick wall sealed itself with a gentle grinding whisper. But none of them looked back. They were looking forward now, toward all the magic and possibility that waited just around the corner. The alley had been here for centuries. It had seen triumph and tragedy, light and darkness, hope and despair. It had welcomed the founders of Hogwarts and would welcome students yet unborn. Today, it welcomed 3 children, a Potter, a Granger Weasley, and a Malfoy. And in that welcoming, something old became new again. Magic never ended. It only changed hands. The street curved gently as they walked, revealing new wonders with each step. Albus's head swiveled constantly, trying to capture everything. The apothecary with its brass scales gleaming in the window, the shop selling telescopes that seemed to be tracking actual stars despite the morning sunlight, a small storefront advertising spectacular spectacles, glasses for every magical malady. But it was Rose who stopped first, her attention arrested by the large bow window of Flourish and Blotts. The glass was spotless despite the morning crowd, and behind it, books moved in carefully choreographed patterns, flying, stacking, rearranging themselves into towers that defied gravity before collapsing and reforming into new configurations. "There," she breathed, and there was such longing in her voice that Hermione smiled. "I thought you might like this one first," Hermione said softly. The shop sign hung above the door, letters picked out in faded gold. Flourish and Blotts, established 1654. Nearly 400 years of selling books, Albus thought. 400 years of students standing exactly where he stood now, looking at exactly this window, feeling exactly this mixture of excitement and intimidation. Ron pulled open the door, setting off a small bell that chimed in a cascade of notes. Not just one sound, but a chord that seemed to adjust itself to the person entering. For Rose, it played something bright and inquisitive. For Albus, something softer, more tentative. The smell hit him first. Old paper and leather binding, ink and parchment, dust and possibility. It was the smell of knowledge accumulated, of stories waiting, of spells preserved between pages for generations. The shop stretched back much farther than its narrow storefront suggested, rows of shelves disappearing into a pleasant dimness where floating candles provided warm pools of light. Books lined every surface from floor to ceiling. They were crammed into shelves, stacked on tables, arranged in precarious towers that somehow never fell. Some were enormous leather-bound tomes that would require 2 hands to lift. Others were slim volumes that glowed faintly, as though the magic within them couldn't quite be contained by mere paper and binding. And they moved. Not all of them, but enough to create a sense of constant activity. A book on advanced transfiguration theory floated past Albus's ear, heading purposefully toward the back of the shop. Another rose from a display table and settled itself on a higher shelf, apparently displeased with its previous location. "Merlin's beard," Rose whispered, and her voice held the kind of reverence usually reserved for cathedrals. A witch behind the counter looked up from the enormous ledger she was annotating. She was middle-aged, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, and reading glasses perched on her nose. Her robes were ink-stained at the cuffs, and she had the slightly distracted air of someone who spent more time among books than people. "First years?" she asked, but her smile was warm. "You have that look about you. Welcome to Flourish and Blotts." "We need the standard first-year texts," Hermione said, already pulling out Rose's list. "And perhaps a few supplementary volumes, if you have recommendations." The witch's eyes brightened. "Always happy to recommend. Name?" "Granger Weasley. Rose." The witch glanced at Hermione, recognition flickering across her face. "Granger. Not the Hermione Granger who wrote the foreword for the new edition of Hogwarts. A history?" Hermione's cheeks colored slightly. "Yes, that's... yes." "Mum's work is in books now," Rose said, and the pride in her voice was unmistakable. "Actual books that people read." "Your mother's work has been in books for quite some time," the witch said gently. "The new creature writes legislation, alone. Well, let me get your texts." She raised her wand and spoke clearly. "Rose, Granger Weasley. First year Hogwarts." For a moment, nothing happened. Then books began to move. They came from different sections of the shop, gliding through the air with deliberate purpose. The standard book of spells, Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk, descended from a high shelf. A History of Magic by Batilda Bagshot floated in from the history section, looking considerably newer than the copy Harry had used decades ago. Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling, A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emmerich Switch, 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Phillida Spore. Each book joined the growing stack on the counter, arranging themselves in neat order. Rose watched with her mouth slightly open, her scholarly composure completely abandoned. They know, she whispered. They know who needs them. The shop's been here a long time, the witch explained, wrapping the books in brown paper with practiced efficiency. It gets a feel for these things. The books want to be with the right students. Potter, Harry said quietly, and Albus was pulled from his fascination with a display of Daily Prophet historical editions. Albus Potter. The witch's eyes widened slightly. Of course she recognized the name, but she had the tact to simply nod and repeat the summoning. Albus's books began their journey through the shop, and he watched them come, feeling something flutter in his chest. These would be his books, his texts, the beginning of his magical education. Near the back of the shop, Scorpius stood with his parents, his pale fingers trailing along the spines of books in the potions section. Draco watched his son with an expression that was difficult to read. Pride mixed with something that might have been regret, or perhaps simply the weight of knowing how different he wanted his son's life to be from his own. "May I look around?" Scorpius asked quietly. "While you get the texts." Astoria glanced at Draco, who hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Stay where we can see you." Scorpius drifted deeper into the shop, drawn by some instinct toward the older sections, where dust motes danced in the candlelight and the books seemed to whisper to each other in languages older than English. Rose, meanwhile, had abandoned all pretense of restraint. With her required texts secured, she was exploring the shelves with the focused intensity of a general planning a campaign. Her fingers trailed along spines, pulling books out, examining them, occasionally gasping at a particularly interesting title. "Advanced Rune Translation," she read aloud. "Is that too advanced for first year? What about the philosophy of the mundane? Magic in everyday items? Oh, Mum, look, a compendium of common curses and their counter-actions." "Rose, you haven't even learned basic spells yet," Ron said, but his voice was fond. "Maybe start with the assigned books." "But these are all connected," Rose insisted, clutching 3 additional volumes to her chest. "If I understand the theoretical framework, the practical applications will make more sense. It's just logical." Hermione caught Ginny's eye, and they shared a smile, recognition, amusement, the knowledge that some things ran in families stronger than eye color or height. Albus found himself drawn to a different section, one marked Recent History, the War Years and After. The books here were newer, their spines less cracked, but they carried a weight that had nothing to do with physical mass. The Battle of Hogwarts, a survivor's account. Rebuilding the Wizarding World, 1998-2005. The Dark Lord, an objective analysis. And there, prominently displayed on an end cap, Hogwarts, a history. New edition, by Bathilda Bagshot, with additional chapters by Hermione Granger. Albus pulled it down carefully. The book was substantial, bound in deep burgundy leather, with gold lettering. He opened it to the foreword, finding his Aunt Hermione's name printed in elegant script. Below it, in her precise handwriting, she'd written, "For those who fought, for those who fell, and for those who will carry magic forward into a better world." "Heavy reading for a first year," said a voice beside him. Albus looked up to find a portrait watching him from the wall. The wizard in the frame was elderly, with flowing white hair and half-moon spectacles. He held a book in his painted hands, though Albus couldn't make out the title. My aunt wrote part of it," Albus said, feeling suddenly shy. I wanted to see. Hermione Granger's work is excellent, the portrait said approvingly. Thoroughly researched, carefully cited, and written with both passion and precision. A rare combination. He leaned forward slightly. You have her eyes, you know. The Weasley shape, but the Granger intensity. I'm a Potter, actually. Albus Potter. The portrait went very still. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. Ah, then you carry a different legacy, though no less important. He gestured at the book in Albus's hands. That will tell you what happened. But it won't tell you what it felt like. The fear, the courage, the small moments of kindness that mattered more than any spell. Those stories live in the people who were there. Albus glanced across the shop to where his father stood, helping Ginny choose a book on Quidditch tactics for James. Harry looked ordinary in this moment, just another parent in a bookshop discussing sports with his wife. But the books in this section knew differently. They held his story, his choices, the things he'd done and survived. It's a lot, Albus said quietly, not sure if he was talking to the portrait or himself. Yes, the portrait agreed, but you're not your father, and Hogwarts is not at war. You'll write your own story, young Potter. That's the gift they gave you, the freedom to be whoever you choose. Before Albus could respond, Rose appeared at his elbow, her arms now laden with books. There you are. Did you see they have magical ethics in the post-war era? Professor Clearwater from the Ministry wrote it, and Mum says she's brilliant. It explores how magical law had to adapt after Voldemort. She caught herself, the name still strange on her tongue, heavy with history. After everything changed. Albus looked down at the book Rose had added to her pile. The cover showed a set of scales, perfectly balanced, with light and darkness on either side. Something about it called to him. The idea that magic wasn't just spells and potions, but choices and consequences. Would it be okay if I got that one too? He asked. Rose's face lit up. Yes, then we can discuss it during term. Compare notes. Mom says that's how you really learn, through discourse and debate. From across the shop, Scorpius had found something as well. He stood in a shaft of sunlight, holding a slim volume bound in green leather. The language of plants, magical herbology through the ages. His grey eyes moved across the pages with surprising speed, absorbing information the way his mother absorbed potions theory, with quiet intensity. Draco approached, glancing at the book's cover with raised eyebrows. Herbology? I didn't know you were interested. I didn't either, Scorpius admitted. But it's fascinating. Did you know that Dittany can close wounds not through active healing magic, but by convincing the body it was never injured in the first place? It's not the plant that's magical. It's the conversation between the plant and the wizard. A smile touched Draco's face, genuine and surprised. No, I didn't know that. Shall we add it to your collection? As their texts were wrapped and purchased, the shop seemed to settle around them with satisfaction, like a cat that had successfully arranged everyone in their proper places. The morning sun slanted through the windows at a steeper angle now, illuminating dust motes and the faint shimmer of preservation spells that kept the older books from crumbling. Rose clutched her parcels with fierce joy, already planning which book she'd read first on the Hogwarts Express. Albus felt the weight of magical ethics in his bag, a weight that was partly physical, but mostly the knowledge that he was about to learn things that would change how he understood the world. And Scorpius, walking out of the shop between his parents, held his book on herbology like a talisman, proof that perhaps he wasn't just a Malfoy heir following a predetermined path, but someone who might discover his own interests, his own passions, his own way. Behind them, barely noticed in the rush of departure, a small portrait winked from its frame. Gilderoy Lockhart, relegated to a dusty corner after his fall from grace, flashed his signature smile at no one in particular. "Promising batch this year," he announced to the shop at large. "Mark my words, great things ahead." The other portraits ignored him as they usually did. But perhaps just this once, he wasn't entirely wrong. Outside, Diagon Alley continued its morning commerce. Shopkeepers opening shutters, owls delivering post, the first batch of students queuing at the ice cream parlor despite the early hour. The cobblestones gleamed where someone had cast a cleaning charm, and the air smelled of fresh bread from the bakery 2 doors down. "Right," Hermione said, consulting her list with the same systematic approach Rose had inherited. "Robes next, then Ollivanders, unless anyone's hungry." "Always," Ron said automatically, earning him an elbow from his wife and laughter from his daughter. They began walking again, the 3 families loosely together, but not quite merged, each maintaining their own space while sharing the same destination. Ahead, Madame Malkin's sign swung gently in a breeze that smelled of magic and possibility. But Albus glanced back once at Flourish and Blotts, at its ancient bow window, and the books still arranging themselves in eternal patterns behind the glass. Something had begun in there, he thought, not just the purchasing of required texts, but something more fundamental. The books had chosen them just as surely as they'd chosen the books. And in that choosing, in that first real act of claiming magical education as their own, they'd crossed another threshold. The alley hummed its approval, old stones remembering other students, other first trips, other moments when the future flickered into being beneath morning sunlight. Magic recognized its own, and today it had welcomed 3 more children into its ancient, unending story. Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions occupied a cheerful corner where the cobblestones widened into a small plaza. The shop's exterior had been freshly painted, cream with deep purple trim, and the windows displayed robes on enchanted mannequins that turned slowly, showing off the drape and fall of various fabrics. A sign in elegant script promised traditional tailoring with modern magical convenience. As they approached, a mannequin wearing Ravenclaw dress robes executed a small bow in their direction. Rose giggled despite herself. "Much brighter than I remember," Hermione murmured to Ginny. "During the war, everything was so grey," Ginny finished quietly. "Everything was grey." But there was nothing grey about Madame Malkin's now. The shop practically radiated warmth and welcome, from the potted plants flanking the entrance to the soft purple glow of the lamp in the window. This was a place that had survived darkness and chosen to emerge not just intact, but deliberately, defiantly cheerful. A bell chimed as they entered, a proper bell this time, not the musical cascade of Flourish and Blotts, but a clear, bright sound that announced customers without pretension. The interior was organized chaos. Bolts of fabric in every conceivable color lined the walls. Dress robes hung from enchanted racks that rotated slowly, allowing customers to browse without walking. Workbenches held pincushions that appeared to be organizing themselves, needles that threaded on command, and scissors that snipped at the air as if practicing for their next assignment. And the mirrors. Oh, the mirrors. They covered one entire wall, but these weren't ordinary mirrors. As Albus approached, his reflection smiled at him encouragingly. Then it spoke. "First time for robes?" the reflection asked in a kindly voice. "Don't worry, everyone's nervous the first time. You'll look splendid. Perhaps Gryffindor red would suit. You have the coloring for it." "It doesn't know yet," Albus whispered to his mother. "The sorting, I mean." "The mirrors are optimistic," Ginny said, her hand warm on his shoulder. "They see potential, not just facts." From deeper in the shop came a voice Albus recognized from his father's stories. Surprisingly squat, bustling, cheerful. Madame Malkin herself emerged from behind a curtain, her tape measure already floating beside her like a trained familiar. "Hogwarts first years?" she asked, though it clearly wasn't a question. Her eyes moved over them with the practiced assessment of someone who'd fitted generations of students. "Excellent, excellent. 3 of you today. Wonderful. Now who's first?" Rose's hand shot up automatically, the gesture so immediate and eager that Ron laughed. "That's my girl. First for everything." "Eager students make the easiest fittings," Madame Malkin said approvingly. "Up on the stool, dear. Name?" "Rose Granger Weasley." If the name meant anything to Madame Malkin, and surely it did, she gave no sign beyond a slight softening around her eyes. "Lovely name. Hold still now. Arms out." The measuring tape sprang to life, wrapping itself around Rose's shoulders, waist, arms, inseam. It moved with businesslike efficiency, the numbers appearing in glowing script in the air beside Madame Malkin's head. Rose held perfectly still, though her eyes tracked the tape's movements with scientific interest. "Mum," she said suddenly, "could I have extra pockets? Enchanted ones? For books and quills and things?" Hermione smiled. "I wondered when you'd ask." "Yes, sweetheart. Extra pockets?" "Sensible," Madame Malkin pronounced. "I can do expansion charms as well. Pockets that hold more than they should. Popular with the Ravenclaws. You'll need 3 school robes, 1 winter cloak, 1 set of dress robes for formal occasions, and the protective dragonhide gloves. The plain work robes come with standard reinforcement charms, stain-resistant, minor rip repair, temperature regulation. For an additional fee, I can add self-cleaning charms." "Yes, please," Hermione said immediately, and Ron shook his head with fond exasperation. "You're going to spoil her." "I'm going to save us from doing laundry charms every other day. There's a difference." While Rose was being fitted, Albus wandered toward the mirrors again. His reflection watched him approach, and this time it didn't speak, just smiled. A small, encouraging smile that reminded him of his mother's. "You'll be fine, you know," said another voice. Albus turned to find Scorpius, standing a few feet away, also watching the mirrors. In the glass, their reflections stood side by side, 2 11-year-old boys on the threshold of something enormous. "How do you know?" Albus asked. Scorpius shrugged, a tiny gesture that somehow conveyed volumes of uncertainty. "I don't, really, but my mother keeps saying it, and she doesn't usually lie. Not about important things." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. 2 boys who'd been raised to be wary of each other, whose families carried histories that didn't intersect peacefully. But here, in this moment, they were just children about to attend the same school, feel the same fears, navigate the same challenges. "Your dad's Harry Potter," Scorpius said finally. It wasn't quite a question. Yeah, that must be, I don't know, hard. Albus looked at him in surprise. Most people assumed having Harry Potter as a father was automatically wonderful, automatically easy. But Scorpius's grey eyes held understanding, the understanding of someone who also carried a weighted name. Sometimes, Albus admitted. Yours is Draco Malfoy. Yeah. Scorpius's voice went very quiet. That's hard too. Different reasons, but hard. Another silence, but this one felt different, more comfortable. The beginning of something that might eventually become understanding. Next, Madame Malkin called cheerfully, and both boys startled. Albus found himself ushered onto the stool before he could properly register what was happening. The measuring tape descended, and suddenly he was being measured from every conceivable angle, while Madame Malkin made small, encouraging noises. Good straight back, good shoulders, she muttered. Growing boy. I'll add extra length to the hems for the growth spurts. Your father came through here once, you know, years ago. Tiny thing he was, all bones and big eyes. Look at him now. Albus glanced to where Harry stood with Ginny, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. Harry didn't look particularly impressive at the moment. Just a man in casual robes, a bit rumpled, a few grey hairs catching the light. But the scars were there if you knew to look for them. The slight stiffness in his left shoulder from a curse that never quite healed right. The way his hand sometimes drifted toward his pocket where his wand rested. The habit of checking exits, even in a peaceful robe shop. Arms up, Madame Malkin instructed, and Albus obeyed. The tape measured his inseam, and he felt his cheeks warm as it worked. Something about the process felt intensely personal, this cataloguing of his physical self to be translated into robes that would mark him as a Hogwarts student. Fidgeting won't make it go faster, dear, Madame Malkin said, but her tone was gentle. First, robes are always strange. You'll grow into them. Not just the robes themselves, but the idea of them. Right now, you're a boy in regular clothes. Soon, you'll be a Hogwarts student in proper robes, and that changes things. Makes it real. Is it supposed to feel this big? Albus asked quietly. Oh yes. If it didn't feel big, I'd worry about you. She patted his shoulder as the tape finished its work. There now. Standard school robes, winter cloak, dress robes, protective gloves. Any special requests? Your friend asked for extra pockets. Albus thought about it. What did he need? What would make this easier? Could the robes be, I don't know, comfortable? Like really comfortable? Some robes feel stiff and scratchy. Madame Malkin's expression softened. A boy who knows his own mind. Yes, dear. I'll use the softer weave. Add extra comfort charms. Your robes will feel like you've worn them for years, right from the start. Sometimes that helps. Feeling like you already belong. The words settled something in Albus's chest. Feeling like you already belong. Yes, that's what he wanted. Scorpius was fitted last, and Albus watched as Draco stood close by, adjusting his son's collar for what must have been the 10th time that morning. There was such tenderness in the gesture, such careful attention, that Albus felt something shift in his understanding of Scorpius's father. Stop fussing, Astoria said softly, but she was smiling. He's perfect. His collar's crooked. It's fine, Draco. It should be perfect. His first robes should be. They will be, Madame Malkin interrupted kindly. I promise you, Mr. Malfoy, Your son will have the finest first-year robes I've ever made. Every stitch perfect, every charm precisely placed. He'll do you proud." Draco's jaw worked for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. "That's not... I just want him to be happy, to fit in, to have the experience I never..." He stopped, seemed to collect himself. "Thank you, Madam Malkin. I trust your work." The robes would be ready within the hour, so they stepped back out into Diagon Alley to wait. The morning had progressed toward noon, and the street was fuller now, packed with families completing their shopping. The air hummed with conversation and the occasional burst of accidental magic from excited children testing the boundaries of their control. "Where next?" Ron asked, though everyone already knew the answer. Ollivanders stood at the far end of Diagon Alley, its narrow storefront looking exactly as it had for centuries. The shop seemed to exist slightly apart from the commercial bustle around it, older, quieter, weighted with purpose rather than mere trade. The window display was simple, a single wand resting on a purple cushion, no price tag, no elaborate presentation, just the wand itself, pale and perfect, waiting. As they approached, Albus felt his heart begin to race. This was it. This was the moment that would determine something fundamental about his magical identity. The wand chooses the wizard. Everyone knew that. But what if no wand chose him? What if he stood in Ollivanders for hours while wand after wand rejected him? "Stop catastrophizing," Ginny murmured in his ear. "I can literally hear you thinking. Every single witch and wizard finds their wand eventually. You will too. But what if? No what ifs. Trust the process." The door to Ollivanders opened silently, as though it had been waiting for them. Inside, the shop was dim and crowded, every surface covered with long, narrow boxes stacked to the ceiling. The air smelled of wood and something else. Something metallic and warm, like lightning captured and contained. A young man emerged from the back of the shop, and Albus felt a jolt of surprise. He'd expected old Mr. Ollivander, the wand-maker from his father's stories. But this man was perhaps 30, with dark hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Theo Ollivander," he introduced himself, his voice carrying a slight reverence, as though even speaking in this space required respect. "Garrick Ollivander's grandson. He's retired now, but I learned at his knee. The craft continues." Harry stepped forward, his hand unconsciously moving to his wand pocket. "Theo, I remember when you were apprenticing. You must have been, 16? 17, Mr. Potter. You came in after the war, needed your wand checked for damage. It still serves you well." "Perfectly." Theo's smile was genuine. "Holly and phoenix feather. 11 inches, nice and supple. A wand that's been through battles most wand makers only read about in histories." He turned his attention to the children. "Now then, which of you's ready?" 3 hands didn't rise. 3 children looked at each other, suddenly uncertain. This moment felt too large, too defining. What if they weren't ready? What if... "I'll go," Rose said suddenly, lifting her chin in determination. "Someone has to go first." She stepped forward, and Theo regarded her with the same careful attention he might give a complex wand-making problem. "Rose Granger Weasley, your mother's wand is vinewood with dragon heartstring, 10 3/4 inches. Your father's is willow and unicorn hair, 14 inches. But you're neither of them, are you? You're yourself entirely." "Yes," Rose said firmly. "I am." "Good. That's very good." Theo moved along the shelves, his fingers trailing over boxes, pausing, moving on, returning. The process seemed both random and utterly deliberate. One selection is as much art as science. The wand knows. I simply listen. He pulled down a box, opened it, and presented Rose with a wand of pale wood, smooth and elegant. Cherry and unicorn hair. 9 inches. Give it a wave. Rose took the wand, flicked it experimentally, and immediately a shower of sparks, purple and green, exploded from the tip, causing several boxes to topple from the shelves. Ah, no, definitely not. Theo retrieved the wand quickly. The wand is certain. Let's try. Yes. Another box. Another wand. This one was darker, richer in color. Hazel and phoenix feather. 10 inches, reasonably pliant. Rose waved this one, and nothing happened. No sparks, no explosions, just nothing. The wand fell dead in her hand. Also no. Interesting. Theo was already reaching for another box, his movements faster now, more decisive. He seemed to be following some internal logic, pursuing a thread only he could sense. 4 more wands, 6, 8. With each rejection, Rose's confidence flickered, and Hermione shifted closer, offering silent support. Then Theo paused. His hand hovered over a box tucked away in a corner, almost hidden. He pulled it down carefully, reverently, and opened it to reveal a wand of burnished red gold wood that seemed to glow in the dim light. "Vine wood," he said softly, "like your mother's, but not dragon heartstring. This one has a core of unicorn hair from a mare who lived wild in the forest of Dean. She gave 3 hairs in her lifetime, and this is the last one. The wand is 10½ inches, quite rigid at first, but it learns. It grows with its owner." He offered it to Rose, and the moment her fingers closed around the handle, the shop seemed to take a breath. The air shifted, warmed. Rose raised the wand, and golden light, pure and warm as summer sunshine, poured from its tip. It spiraled through the shop, gentle and controlled, before fading into a soft shimmer that hung in the air like morning mist. "Oh," Rose breathed. "Oh, it's yours," Theo finished, and his smile was triumphant. "Absolutely yours. The wand and the witch recognize each other. Congratulations, Miss Granger Weasley." Hermione's eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed, and Ron pulled his daughter into a fierce hug. Rose held her wand carefully, reverently, as though it might vanish if she wasn't vigilant. Albus watched, feeling the weight of anticipation settle heavier on his shoulders. Rose had found her wand. Soon it would be his turn, and Scorpius's. What would his wand be? What would it say about who he was, who he might become? Theo turned his attention to the boys. "Now then, who's next?" Albus and Scorpius looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. Fear and solidarity, and the strange bond forming between children who shared the same uncertainty. "Together," Scorpius suggested quietly. "Not the actual selection, but at the same time. So neither of us has to wait alone?" Albus felt something warm unfold in his chest. "Yeah, together." Theo's eyebrows rose, but he nodded. "Unconventional, but I don't see why not. The wands won't mind. They're patient." He began pulling boxes, moving between the 2 boys with practiced efficiency. For Scorpius, a succession of elegant woods, ebony, yew, blackthorn. Each produced either dramatic rejections or sullen silence. For Albus, broader variety, oak, rowan, cedar. Nothing quite fit. The wands seemed to slide through their fingers like water, refusing to be grasped. The rejections piled up. 10 wands, 15, 20. "This is normal," Theo assured them, though his expression had grown thoughtful. Difficult matches make the strongest bonds. The one that's easy to find is rarely the one that changes you. Finally, almost simultaneously, Theo pulled 2 boxes from different sections of the shop. He held them for a moment, weighing something invisible, then nodded to himself. "Scorpius Malfoy," he said formally. "Try this. Hawthorn and unicorn hair, 10 inches exactly, unyielding." The wand was pale, almost white, beautiful and slightly unsettling. Scorpius took it with trembling fingers, and immediately silver light, cold and brilliant as starlight, burst from the tip. It filled the shop with radiance, reflecting off every surface, turning the dusty interior into something that looked like a winter night sky. Scorpius gasped, and Draco's hand found Astoria's, their fingers lacing tight. "Unyielding," Theo repeated softly. "Like its owner. Hawthorn is a healing wood, associated with contradictions, protection and harm, hope and tragedy. It chooses witches and wizards with complex natures, those who live with internal conflict. And unicorn hair provides consistency, prevents dark magic from taking root. A powerful wand, Mr. Malfoy. Use it well." Scorpius nodded, unable to speak, cradling his wand like something precious and fragile and infinitely powerful all at once. Then Theo turned to Albus, and his expression was solemn. "And for you, Albus Potter, I wondered if it might be this one. I've been saving it, not quite sure who it was waiting for. Now I know." He opened the final box, and Albus's breath caught. The wand was ashwood, dark grey with subtle grain, elegant without pretension. But there was something about it, some quality of patient strength, of endurance, of roots growing deep and branches reaching high. "Ashwood," Theo said quietly, "and phoenix feather, 10 3/4 inches, slightly springy. Ash wands are loyal, choosing owners who are courageous, but not foolhardy, who think before acting, but act decisively when needed." "And phoenix feather?" He glanced at Harry. "Well, you know what phoenix feather means." Albus reached for the wand, and the moment his fingers touched the smooth wood, he knew. It felt like coming home, like finding something he'd been missing without knowing it was gone. He raised it, and the light that emerged was neither gold like roses, nor silver like Scorpius's. It was warm and steady, the color of firelight, of autumn leaves, of courage that wasn't loud but present. It filled the shop gently, thoroughly, before fading into contentment. "Yes," Theo said simply. "That's the one. Your wand, Mr. Potter." Harry's hand rested on Albus's shoulder, and when Albus looked up, his father's eyes were bright with emotion he didn't try to hide. "Phoenix feather," Harry said quietly. "Fawkes's feather, like mine." "Not the same wand," Theo clarified. "Never the same. But brothers, in a way, connected by origin, but finding their own paths, like sons and fathers." The words hung in the air, weighted with meaning. Albus held his wand, and felt the truth of it settle into his bones. He was Harry Potter's son. That was true, would always be true. But he was also himself, holding a wand that had chosen him not because of his name, but because of who he was, who he might become. Outside, Diagon Alley continued its business, but inside Ollivanders, 3 children stood holding the tools that would define their magical lives. 3 families, Potter, Granger Weasley, Malfoy, bound together by this moment, this threshold, this choice that wasn't really a choice because the wands had already decided. "Congratulations," Theo said, and his voice held the weight of tradition, of craft, of magic recognizing its own. "You are now officially armed. Hogwarts awaits. The wands were carefully boxed and tucked safely into bags, precious cargo that would travel with them to Hogwarts and beyond. Albus couldn't stop touching the edge of his box, reassuring himself that it was real, that the wand inside had truly chosen him. Beside him, Rose held her own box with scholarly reverence, while Scorpius walked with his tucked under one arm, protective and slightly possessive. The afternoon sun had reached its zenith, bathing Diagon Alley in warm golden light. The crowds had thickened, families everywhere now, completing last-minute shopping, children dragging parents toward shop windows, owls hooting from the Eeylops Owl Emporium down the street, and then, impossible to miss, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. The shop exploded into the street like a carnival that had escaped containment. The building itself was painted in violent orange and purple, colors so bright they seemed to vibrate against the more subdued tones of neighboring shops. The windows displayed a riot of movement, fireworks spelling out words in midair, enchanted toys chasing each other in eternal loops, something that might have been a rubber chicken executing a perfect somersault. But it was the sign above the door that made Albus's chest tighten. Two figures flanked it, painted in loving detail, identical twins with matching grins, holding wands like they were conducting an orchestra of chaos. George and Fred Weasley, together as they'd always been in life, preserved in paint and memory. Ron stopped walking, just stopped, in the middle of the street, staring up at the sign. His jaw worked, and Hermione's hand found his, lacing their fingers together in silent support. "Dad?" Rose asked quietly. "Are you?" "Fine," Ron said roughly. "Just, it never gets easier, you know? Seeing him up there, remembering." Harry moved closer, his presence a steady comfort. No words. What words could there be after all these years? But his hand gripped Ron's shoulder, and the gesture said everything that needed saying. Ginny's expression had gone distant, lost in memory. "Fred would have loved this moment," she said softly. Watching the next generation discover his shop. He'd have had some elaborate prank planned, something to welcome them properly. "He still might," Ron said, managing a weak smile. Never could tell with Fred, even now. The door burst open before they could knock, and George Weasley stood in the entrance, older than the painted figure above, but still unmistakably himself. His hair was streaked with grey now, and lines had etched themselves around his eyes and mouth, some from laughter, some from grief. He wore robes in the shop's signature orange, and his grin, while perhaps not quite as bright as it once was, still carried that familiar spark of mischief. "Oi!" he called out. "Was wondering when you lot would show up. Been watching from the window. Come in, come in. First years wait for no one, and I've got things to show you." He swept them inside with the enthusiasm of a showman, and Albus felt his breath catch for the third time that day. The shop was chaos incarnate, deliberate, joyful, overwhelming chaos. Every surface burst with color and movement. The ceiling was too high, expanded by magic to accommodate flying products and floating demonstrations. Shelves climbed impossible heights, accessed by ladders that moved on their own, carrying customers to whatever level they needed. The noise hit them like a physical force. Laughter, explosions, controlled ones. Music from self-playing instruments. The chatter of enchanted products advertising themselves in squeaky voices. A display of pygmy puffs chirped from one corner, their tiny bodies vibrating with excitement. Somewhere, something went bang. followed immediately by children's delighted squeals. The smell was equally complex: sugar and sulfur, burned caramel and firecracker powder, something that might have been butterscotch mixed with something that definitely wasn't. It was the smell of childhood wonder mixed with carefully controlled mayhem. "Merlin," Rose breathed, her scholarly composure cracking completely. "It's everything," Scorpius finished quietly, his grey eyes wide. Products covered every available surface, each more impossible than the last. Albus spotted extendable ears dangling from hooks, skiving snack boxes stacked in neat pyramids, love potions in heart-shaped bottles, labelled "for entertainment purposes only, ministry approved," and an entire section dedicated to what the sign declared: portable swamps, because sometimes nature needs help. "Welcome," George announced, spreading his arms wide, "to the finest joke shop in Britain, possibly the world, definitely Diagon Alley." His eyes found Rose, Albus, and Scorpius. "First time." 3 nods, 3 awestruck faces. George's expression softened. "Right then, special tour for first years. Come with me." He led them deeper into the shop, past displays of decoy detonators and defense items, shield cloaks and shield hats that Fred and George had developed during the war, years when protection was no laughing matter. The products here carried a different weight, humor built on top of genuine defensive magic. "These kept people safe," George said quietly, running his hand over a shield hat. "During the bad times, Fred was particularly proud of these. Said if we could make protection fashionable, maybe more people would wear it." "Did they work?" Albus asked. "Saved lives," Harry said from behind them. "I know for a fact. They were brilliant." George nodded, accepting the praise with uncharacteristic seriousness. Then the moment passed, and his grin returned. "But you lot don't need to worry about that. You're getting the peacetime experience, the fun stuff. Speaking of which," he pulled 3 boxes from behind the counter, identical packages wrapped in orange paper with purple ribbons. "For you. Consider it a welcome gift from your Uncle George." "Uncle George, we couldn't," Rose started, but George waved her off. "You absolutely could, and you will. Family privilege. Besides, I know what your parents put up with from Fred and me. Consider this partial payback, or perhaps revenge, depending on how you look at it." Ron groaned. "George, what are you giving my daughter?" "Nothing dangerous. Much." George's grin turned wicked. "Peace pop firecrackers. Completely harmless, entirely spectacular, and guaranteed to make you the most interesting person in your dormitory for at least a week." He handed the first box to Rose, who took it with careful hands, treating it like the explosive it technically was. "What do they do?" "Ah, that's the beauty of it. You don't know until you use them. Each firecracker is different. Some make music, some make light, some make both. One time, we had one that created a temporary aurora borealis effect in the Great Hall. McGonagall was furious, but also secretly impressed. We could tell." Albus received his box next, feeling the slight warmth emanating from it, the promise of controlled chaos. Something Fred and George had made. Fred and George, who were legends in his family, whose exploits filled countless dinner table stories. Scorpius hesitated when George held out the 3rd box. His eyes flicked to his parents, uncertain. Draco's expression was complicated. Surprise, wariness, something that might have been old pain resurfacing. "Go on," George said gently, and his voice carried none of its usual joviality. "It's just a gift, Scorpius. No strings. No expectations. Just welcome to the magical world. Welcome to a version that includes laughter. Slowly, Scorpius reached out and took the box. His fingers trembled slightly as they closed around it. "Thank you," he whispered. Thank you." "Fred would have wanted you to have it," George said. And there was weight in those words, layers of meaning about forgiveness and moving forward, about refusing to let the sins of fathers define the lives of sons. He believed magic should bring joy. All of us. No exceptions. Draco's throat worked visibly, and Astoria's hand found his arm, steadying him. George clapped his hands, dispelling the heavy moment. "Right. Shop tour continues. Rose, since you're the scholarly type, you'll appreciate this section." He led them to a corner marked Educational Explosions. Learn while you laugh. The products here were different from the rest of the shop. Still playful, but with an underlying seriousness. Potion kits that made learning ingredient interactions fun. Spell practice sets that gave encouraging feedback. Flashcards that literally flashed when you got an answer right. "Your mum consulted on some of these," George told Rose. "Hermione's idea, actually. She said there's no reason learning can't be engaging. So we developed products that teach while they entertain." Rose picked up a box labeled Portable Potion Practice. Brew safely anywhere. Her eyes scanned the description with growing excitement. "This is brilliant. It's a complete mini laboratory with safety charms built in. You could practice advanced potions without access to a full classroom." "Exactly," George beamed. "Sold hundreds to students studying for OWLs and NEWTs. Your mum test ran the charms herself. Wouldn't let me sell a single unit until she was satisfied it was both educational and explosion-proof." "That sounds like Mum," Rose said fondly. They wandered deeper into the shop. Albus found himself drawn to a display of Quidditch-related pranks. Bludgers that made rude noises. Practice snitches that taunted you in squeaky voices. Keeper gloves that occasionally developed minds of their own and tried to catch things that weren't quaffles. "Your mum was a terror on a broom," George told Albus conversationally. "Best chaser Gryffindor had in decades. Fred and I used to practice new Quidditch products on her. She'd test them, tell us what worked, what didn't, what might cause actual injury versus funny injury. Good times." "She doesn't talk about that much," Albus admitted. "Her Quidditch days, I mean." "Painful memories mixed with good ones," George said quietly. "War interrupted a lot of things. She was supposed to go professional, you know. The Harpies wanted her. But after, well, priorities changed. Doesn't mean she wasn't brilliant, though. Probably still is. I'd bet good galleons she could outfly half the current professionals." Scorpius had gravitated toward the section on Muggle magic tricks, pranks that worked without wands, illusions that relied on sleight of hand and misdirection rather than actual spells. He examined a set of disappearing coins with the same focused intensity he'd brought to the herbology book. "Interesting choice," George observed, moving beside him. "Most wizards overlook the Muggle section. They think why bother without magic. But Fred and I always thought there was something elegant about purely mechanical trickery. The skill required, the practice." "It's clever," Scorpius said quietly. "Magic makes things easier. But this, you have to really understand how perception works, how to direct attention. It's almost like potions, precision and timing instead of raw power." George's eyebrows rose appreciably. "Smart kid, you're absolutely right. Here, he pulled a slim book from the shelf. Sleight of hand for the magical-minded. On the house. Consider it an investment in a future customer. Scorpius clutched the book with the same reverence Rose had shown her wand. Thank you, really. Thank you. The shop's energy pulsed around them. Customers laughing, products demonstrating themselves, the constant low-grade controlled chaos that was the Weasley brothers' signature. But in their small corner, something quieter was happening. 3 children were being welcomed into a space that represented more than just commerce. This was legacy. This was Fred and George's refusal to let darkness win, their insistence that magic should include joy, their belief that laughter was its own kind of spell. A small explosion from the testing area, purple smoke and glitter, made everyone jump. George just sighed. That'll be someone testing the new Diagon discs without reading the instructions. Excuse me a moment. As he hurried off to manage the situation, the 3 families stood together among the chaos. Ron's eyes kept drifting to the portrait of Fred painted on the far wall. Not the sign outside, but a smaller, more intimate painting of his brother laughing, mid-joke, forever young. Do you think he knows? Ron asked suddenly. About all this, about Rose and Albus and Hugo and James and Lily and everything. Yes, Hermione said firmly. However it works, wherever he is, yes, he knows. He'd be delighted about today, Ginny added softly. 3 more first years, starting their journey. He loved beginnings, said they were like blank pages, all that potential for mischief. Harry smiled. He once told me the best thing about Hogwarts was watching first years figure out which rules were actually important and which ones were there specifically to be broken creatively. That sounds exactly like Fred, Ron said, and his voice was thick but steady. Rose approached the portrait of her uncle, the one she'd never met but had heard about in countless stories. She stood there for a long moment, just looking, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I wish I'd known you. Everyone says you were brilliant, funny and brave and brilliant. The portrait didn't move. It was just paint, not a living portrait like those at Hogwarts. But somehow the fixed expression of joy seemed to encompass Rose in its warmth. A blessing, perhaps, or just the imagination of a girl trying to connect with family she'd never have. Albus moved to stand beside her, and Scorpius, after a moment's hesitation, joined them. 3 children, looking at the image of a man who died fighting for their right to stand in this shop, in this world, free and safe, and surrounded by laughter. The war stories make everything sound so dark, Albus said quietly. But this is different. This is light. That's the point, Harry said, joining them. That's what they fought for. Not just to end darkness, but to preserve this. Silly jokes and magical pranks and shops that exist purely to make people laugh. Fred understood that better than most. George returned, slightly singed but grinning. Crisis averted. The customer is fine, just a bit sparkly. Should wear off in a few hours, maybe a day. He looked at the 3 children standing before Fred's portrait. He'd have liked you lot, all of you. Would have had personalized pranks planned for your first week at Hogwarts. Probably something involving your famous parents. He loved taking important people down a peg in the most ridiculous ways possible. Tell them about the time you pranked Professor McGonagall, Ginny suggested. Oh, that's a good one. George's eyes lit up. 5th year, Fred and I enchanted all the suits of armor to sing Christmas carols but only when McGonagall walked past. Took her 3 days to figure out it was us. She was impressed despite herself. The charm work was complex. She gave us detention, but also gave us house points. First time that had happened. The story led to another, and another. George sharing memories with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to speak of his lost twin without breaking. The shop bustled around them, but in their small circle, time seemed to slow, making space for stories and laughter and the gentle ache of remembering someone loved. Finally, reluctantly, they had to move on. There were still items to purchase, shops to visit. The afternoon was progressing faster than any of them had realized. "Before you go," George said, "one more thing." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a large bag. "Samples, new products we're testing. Consider yourselves my field researchers. Try them at Hogwarts. Let me know what works, what doesn't, what gets you in trouble with the professors." "George," Hermione said warningly. "Nothing that will get them expelled," George protested. "Just mildly reprimanded. At worst. Probably." Ron laughed, the sound lighter than it had been when they'd entered. "That's the most Fred thing you've said all day." "I'll take that as a compliment," George said softly, "because it is one." They moved toward the door, bags laden with purchases both practical and impractical, pockets holding Peace Pop firecrackers, and the promise of controlled chaos. The shop's energy pulsed around them one last time, a final embrace of color and sound and joy. As they stepped back into Diagon Alley proper, the afternoon sun painting the cobblestones gold, Albus looked back at the shop. The painted figures of Fred and George still flanked the sign, still grinned with identical mischief, still represented something precious, the refusal to let darkness have the final word. That was... Rose started, then stopped, unable to find adequate words. "Yeah," Albus agreed. "It was." Even Scorpius, who'd been quiet for most of the visit, managed a small smile. The book George had given him was tucked carefully in his bag, a gift that meant more than its giver might have realized. Proof that he could be welcomed, could be accepted, could be given things without suspicion or judgment. The alley had warmed in their absence, or perhaps they'd simply become more attuned to its temperature. The specific warmth of magic and commerce and community all mixing together. More shops awaited, more discoveries, more moments that would define this day, this beginning, this threshold they were crossing from childhood into something more complex and wonderful. But for now, they carried with them the laughter of Weasley's wizard wheezes, the ghost of Fred's mischief, and the proof that even after darkness, even after loss, joy could survive, must survive, would survive in the hands of children who'd been given the gift of peace and the freedom to find their own kinds of magic. Somewhere in the shop behind them, George Weasley returned to his work, managing chaos with practiced ease, carrying his brother's legacy in every joke and prank and moment of controlled mayhem. The shop hummed with life, Fred's and George's inseparably mixed, impossible to divide even in death. And ahead, the alley stretched on, full of more wonders waiting to be discovered. The laughter from Weasley's wizard wheezes still echoed in Albus's chest as they continued down Diagon Alley. The afternoon had reached that perfect stage where the day felt both endless and fleeting. Enough time to savor everything, but also the awareness that eventually this would end. They'd return home. and soon after, the Hogwarts Express would carry them into their new lives. The cobblestones had warmed under the persistent sun, radiating heat back up through the soles of Albus's shoes. Witches had begun casting cooling charms on themselves, visible as faint shimmers in the air. A vendor sold enchanted lemonade that changed flavor with each sip. Lemon, then strawberry, then something that tasted like summer rain. The apothecary next, Hermione suggested, consulting the increasingly crumpled lists. You'll need basic potion supplies, and it's best to choose your own ingredients when possible. Fresh ingredients make all the difference. Rose's eyes lit up with a particular intensity she reserved for academic subjects. Can we really choose? I thought they'd just give us standard kits. They offer both, Hermione explained as they walked. Standard kits are fine, but if you select your own ingredients, you learn to recognize quality. The color of properly preserved wormwood, the texture of good bezoar, the smell of fresh peppermint. It's foundational knowledge that will serve you well. The apothecary sat between a dusty shop selling crystal balls and a newer establishment advertising practical protection, modern defensive magic for the concerned citizen. Its windows displayed an array of ingredients in glass jars, some beautiful, some disturbing, all fascinating. Beetles suspended in amber fluid, crystallized ginger root that sparkled with its own light, something that might have been dragon liver, preserved and labeled with careful script. The shop's door opened with a creak. No magical chimes here, just old hinges that had weathered decades of opening and closing. The smell hit them immediately, a complex mixture of herbs and minerals, sweet and acrid, earthy and sharp. It was the smell of transformation, of ingredients waiting to become something more than themselves. The interior was organized chaos. Shelves climbed to the ceiling, every surface crowded with bottles, jars, boxes, and pouches. Labels written in varying degrees of legibility announced contents, both mundane and exotic. Dried nettles, powdered silver, extract of belladonna, handle with care, unicorn horn shavings, sustainably sourced. Behind the counter stood a young witch with dark skin and intelligent eyes. Her hair pulled back in intricate braids, threaded with what looked like living vines. She wore an apron covered in mysterious stains, evidence of work, of knowledge applied. "Welcome," she said warmly. "First years, I'm guessing. You have that look, overwhelmed, but trying not to show it. I'm Afua Osei. I run the shop now. My grandmother owned it before me, and her mother before her. 3 generations of knowing which beetle eyes are worth the extra sickles." "We need supplies for potions," Rose said, her voice carrying the slight tremor of someone approaching a subject that both excited and intimidated her. "The standard list, but Mum says we should choose our own ingredients if possible." Afua's smile widened. "Your mum is wise. Standard kits are adequate, but choosing your own teaches you to see, to really see. Come, let me show you." She moved through the shop with fluid grace, pulling ingredients from various shelves with the certainty of intimate knowledge. Potions is about precision, yes, but also about relationship. You must understand your ingredients, not just what they do, but what they are, their nature, their potential. She held up a jar of silvery powder. "Powdered moonstone. See how it catches the light? That shimmer tells you it's fresh, properly ground. Old moonstone loses its luster, becomes dull. It'll still work in simpler potions, but for anything requiring lunar correspondence, you want fresh." Rose leaned in, studying the powder with fierce concentration. Albus watched his cousin transform into something he recognized from watching Aunt Hermione work. Complete absorption, the outside world fading as knowledge took precedence. And this. Afua produced a small bundle of dried leaves, their edges curling slightly, color somewhere between grey and green. Wormwood, crucial for dozens of potions, particularly memory drafts and clarity elixirs. Quality wormwood should still carry a faint bitter scent, even when dried. If it smells like nothing, it's too old. Trust your nose as much as your eyes. She passed the bundle to Rose, who inhaled carefully, then nodded. I smell it. Bitter, but almost clean. Sharp clean, not so clean. Exactly. Afua looked delighted. You have good instincts. What about you? She turned to Albus. Do you want to choose your own ingredients, or would you prefer a standard kit? Albus hesitated. The shop felt overwhelming. So many choices, so much specialized knowledge he didn't possess. I don't know enough to choose well. Then let me teach you 3 things, Afua said kindly. Just 3. First, bezoars. She produced a grey lumpy stone that looked entirely unimpressive. These save lives. Actual lives. They counteract most poisons. Every potion kit should have at least one, and you should know exactly where it is at all times. Not tucked away. Not forgotten in the bottom of your bag. Accessible. She placed the bezoar in Albus's hand. It was heavier than he expected, warm from the shop's ambient heat, and surprisingly smooth despite its irregular shape. Something about holding it made him feel more capable, more prepared. Second, fresh versus dried. Some ingredients work better fresh. Peppermint, for instance. Others need to be dried or preserved. Ginger root, for example. Your textbook will tell you which is which. But here's the secret. Fresh ingredients are more forgiving. They're alive, still growing, still changing. They want to work with you. Dried ingredients are more precise, more stable, but also more unforgiving of mistakes. As a first year, choose fresh when you have the option. And third, Albus asked. Afua's smile turned slightly mischievous. Third, your professor will likely be strict, exacting, and seem completely unreasonable. Every potions professor is. It's part of the job description. But they do it because potions can be dangerous, and precision matters. So when they seem harsh, remember, they're keeping you safe while teaching you power. That's worth a bit of sternness. That's good advice, Harry said softly from behind Albus. Wish someone had told me that in first year. While Rose selected her ingredients with Hermione's guidance, comparing quality, taking notes, asking questions that revealed both knowledge and gaps in knowledge, Scorpius had drifted toward a section of the shop that seemed darker, more mysterious. Rare herbs occupied these shelves, ingredients with unusual properties, things that required special handling or storage. Scorpius's fingers hovered over labels, not quite touching, reading each one with careful attention. Essence of myrtlap, powdered grafhorn horn, valerian root, premium grade, dittany, fresh cut. He stopped at the dittany, leaning close to examine the small vial of green stems and leaves suspended in preservative solution. His grey eyes reflected the shop's dim light, making them look almost silver. You're interested in dittany? Afua asked, appearing at his elbow with the silent grace of someone accustomed to navigating crowded spaces. Scorpius startled slightly, then nodded. I read about it, at Flourish and Blotts. The book said, Dittany doesn't actually heal wounds. It convinces the body that it was never wounded. That's different. That's profound, Afua suggested. Yes, Dittany is one of the most philosophically interesting magical plants. It doesn't force healing. It creates conditions where the body remembers wholeness. It's persuasion rather than command. Very advanced concept for someone who hasn't started classes yet. I like plants, Scorpius said quietly. The way they're patient, the way they don't demand anything. They just grow. They become what they're meant to become, given time and proper care. Something in his voice made Draco, who'd been standing back to give his son space, move closer. Not intruding, just present, available. Plants are excellent teachers, Afua agreed. They teach patience, yes, but also resilience. A plant that's been damaged can still grow, can still thrive, given the right environment. They don't carry grudges. They simply respond to current conditions. She paused, seeming to weigh her words. I think you'll do well in herbology. Professor Longbottom is exceptional, patient and knowledgeable, and he understands that plants respond to care, not force. Neville, Harry said, and his voice carried warmth. Professor Longbottom, I mean. He's one of the bravest people I know, and brilliant with plants. Scorpius, you'll learn a lot from him. Scorpius nodded, still holding the vial of Dittany, and something in his posture had relaxed, as if being understood, even in this small way, had eased some tension he'd been carrying. Would you like fresh Dittany for your kit? Afua asked. It's more expensive than the standard preserved version, but it's also more potent. Better for learning, I think. You can actually see it respond to proper handling. Yes, Scorpius said. Please. While they finalized purchases, ingredients carefully wrapped, protective gloves for handling dangerous substances, stirring rods of different materials for different potion types, the shop door opened again, admitting a rush of warm air and the sound of excited voices. A group of older students entered, already wearing robes marked with house colors, Gryffindor red, Ravenclaw blue. They moved with the easy confidence of those who'd done this before, calling out requests for specific ingredients, debating the merits of different Bezoar grades. Rose watched them with barely concealed longing. That would be her someday, comfortable in this space, knowing exactly what she needed, understanding the subtle distinctions between good and exceptional ingredients. The future, visible and close enough to almost touch. Right then, Ron said, checking his watch. We're making good progress. What's next? And please don't say something that requires more reading. Rose already has enough books to start her own library. Quality Quidditch supplies, Ginny announced, and her tone suggested this was not optional. If we're going to spend all day shopping for academic supplies, we're at least visiting the most important shop in the alley. The most important shop? Hermione repeated with mock offense. I must have missed where Quidditch supplies ranked above, wands or books or actual course materials. Above, Ginny said firmly, but she was grinning. Far, far above. They left the apothecary with packages that clinked softly, glass bottles carefully wrapped, ingredients that required gentle handling. The afternoon had progressed further. The sun had begun its slow descent toward evening, painting the upper stories of buildings in warm amber light, while the street level remained in pleasant shadow. Quality, Quidditch supplies, occupied a prime location near the center of the alley. its massive bow windows displaying the latest in flying technology. The current window featured a single broom suspended in mid-air, rotating slowly to show every angle of its construction. The Firebolt X. Even Albus, who had no particular interest in Quidditch, had to admit it was beautiful. The handle was made from ashwood polished to a deep gleam, the bristles arranged in aerodynamic perfection, and the whole thing seemed to vibrate with barely contained velocity. A small plaque beside it read, Firebolt X, faster than light. Almost. Oh, Ginny breathed, and the reverence in her voice was usually reserved for magic itself. Oh, that's gorgeous. It's a broom, Hermione said, but even she looked impressed. It's not just a broom. It's art. It's engineering. It's... Ginny pressed her hand against the window glass, like a child at a candy shop. Harry, can we go in? Please. I promise I won't buy anything. I just want to look. Harry laughed, familiar with this routine. You say that every time, and every time you end up buying maintenance kits or practice equipment or... This time is different. It's never different. But they went in anyway, the shop door opening to reveal paradise for anyone who'd ever loved flying. Brooms lined the walls in ascending order of quality and price. Quidditch robes hung on enchanted mannequins that demonstrated proper flying positions. Equipment for every position cluttered the displays. Keeper gloves, beater bats, practice snitches that zoomed around the shop in complex patterns. The proprietor looked up from where he was discussing quaffle leather quality with another customer, and his eyes widened with recognition. Ginny Potter, Merlin's beard. I haven't seen you in years, since you retired from the Harpies. Just here with my son, Ginny said, but she was smiling, clearly pleased to be remembered. First-year supplies, though he's not trying out for Quidditch his first year. I might, Albus said, quietly, surprising himself. He hadn't planned to say it, hadn't fully formed the thought, but standing in this shop with his mother's history all around them, something stirred. I mean, maybe, if I'm allowed. Ginny's eyes widened, then softened. Al, you don't have to. I know, but maybe I want to. He did, he realized. Not because of James, who lived and breathed Quidditch, not even because of his mother's legacy, but because flying was freedom, was joy, was something entirely his own that no one could do for him. First years can't have brooms, Rose pointed out, ever practical. School rules. True, the proprietor said, but there's nothing stopping you from getting flying gloves or learning about broom maintenance or understanding the equipment before you ever touch one. Makes you a better flyer when the time comes. Ginny had drifted to the Firebolt X display, circling it with the assessing eye of a professional. Other customers had started to notice, whispers spreading through the shop as people recognized her. Ginny Potter, née Weasley, Harpy's chaser for 3 seasons before retirement, known for her barrel rolls and ability to catch quaffles one-handed while evading bludgers. Still got it, an older wizard muttered to his companion. Look at how she's assessing the bristle arrangement. Professional eye. Ginny either didn't hear or chose to ignore the attention. She ran her hand along the Firebolt X's handle, not quite touching, hovering just above the surface, feeling the magic contained within. The balance is perfect, she said softly. The weight distribution. They've finally solved the tail drag problem that plagued the earlier firebolts. This is extraordinary engineering. Would you like to demonstrate? the proprietor asked, and his voice carried hope. Out back, we have a testing area. Nothing fancy, just enough space for basic maneuvers. But I think the customers would enjoy seeing a professional handle one. Ginny glanced at Harry, who nodded, then at Albus, and something passed between them, a question and an answer, permission sought and given. Why not? Ginny said, and her grin was pure mischief. Been a while since I've flown anything this nice. They moved through the shop to a door marked Staff-Only Testing Area, which opened onto an impossible space. The courtyard outside was perhaps 20 feet square, but the moment they stepped through the door, perspective shifted. The space expanded, stretched, became something much larger, an enchanted testing ground that appeared to be several hundred feet in each direction, with sky overhead, despite being surrounded by buildings. Extension charms, Hermione murmured appreciatively. Expensive ones, and the sky illusion is masterful. Ginny mounted the Firebolt X with the ease of long practice, and something about her posture changed the moment her hands closed around the handle. She became someone different, not just Mum, not just Ginny, Potter, but the athlete she'd been, the flyer who'd made thousands cheer, the competitor who'd never met a quaffle she couldn't catch. She kicked off gently, and the broom responded like it had been waiting for someone who understood it. The acceleration was smooth, powerful, controlled. Ginny rose straight up, then executed a perfect barrel roll at 30 feet. The watching crowd, they'd drawn quite an audience, shop customers and passers-by pressing into the testing area, gasped appreciatively. But Ginny was just warming up. She banked left, dove right, pulled up in a climb so steep it seemed impossible, then leveled out and streaked across the testing space at speeds that blurred her form. Her robes snapped behind her, her hair escaped its tie and flew wild, and her face held pure, uncomplicated joy. Albus watched his mother fly and understood something new about her. This was who she'd been before motherhood, before the quiet, domestic life she'd chosen. This was the part of her that had never quite settled, that still yearned for open sky and the rush of wind and the precise moment when you catch a quaffle that everyone else thought was uncatchable. She performed moves he didn't have names for, complex aerobatics that drew cheers from the knowledgeable crowd. Someone started clapping, then others joined until the testing area rang with applause. Finally, Ginny descended, landing with a lightness that made the dismount look effortless. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, and she was breathing hard but grinning like she'd just been given the best gift imaginable. That broom is perfection, she announced to the proprietor. Tell your suppliers they've outdone themselves. The handling is responsive without being twitchy. The acceleration is phenomenal but never feels out of control. And the stability in complex maneuvers. I've never flown anything better. Coming from you, that's the highest praise possible, the proprietor said, looking delighted. Would you consider giving us a testimonial for marketing materials? We'd... Absolutely not, Harry said firmly but gently. We appreciate the offer, but Ginny's retired from public life. This was just for fun. Just for fun, Ginny agreed, but she looked at the Firebolt X with clear longing. Merlin, what I wouldn't give to own one of those. Maybe for Christmas, Harry suggested. It costs more than some people's annual salary. So, Easter? Ginny laughed and kissed his cheek. You're ridiculous. I love you. As they made their way back through the shop, Ginny accepting compliments with grace, Albus fielding questions about whether he'd inherited his mother's talent, Rose explaining to anyone who'd listen that Quidditch was actually quite mathematically complex. Scorpius hung back with his parents. "Your mother used to fly," Draco said quietly. "Before you were born, she was quite good, not professional level, but graceful, fearless." Astoria smiled. "I wasn't fearless. I was just stubborn. There's a difference. And besides, I gave it up when the illness started affecting my balance. Too dangerous." "Did you miss it?" Scorpius asked. "Flying. Sometimes," Astoria admitted. "But I found other things to love, other ways to feel free. That's the secret, Scorpius. Freedom isn't one thing. It's many things. And you get to choose which ones matter to you." They emerged back into Diagon Alley proper, the afternoon sun now definitely slanting toward evening. Shadows had grown longer, cooler. Shop windows had begun to light up, enchanted lamps flickering to life, creating warm pools of light that turned the street into something from a storybook. Albus's legs ached from walking, his head spun with everything they'd seen and done, and his heart felt too full for his chest. One day, just one day, and already the magical world felt more real, more possible, more his than it ever had sitting in Grimmauld Place, listening to stories. "Almost done," Hermione announced, checking her list. "We have books, robes, wands, potion supplies, and various sundries. Just need to collect the robes from Madame Malkin's, and then—" She paused, smiled. "Then I think we've earned ice cream." "Ice cream," Ron said reverently. "Finally, you're speaking my language." As they walked back toward Madame Malkin's to collect their finished robes, the alley seemed to hum with contentment around them. The day had unfolded perfectly. Each shop a discovery, each purchase a step closer to Hogwarts, each moment another thread in the tapestry of memory they were weaving together. 3 children who'd started the morning uncertain and overwhelmed had grown throughout the day, finding small confidences, discovering unexpected interests, forming the tentative beginning of connections that might, with time, become friendships. The alley knew. The old stones remembered other first trips, other transformations, other moments when everything changed and stayed the same all at once. And ahead, as the evening deepened toward dusk, Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor waited with its promise of sweetness and rest, a place to sit and reflect, to let the day settle into memory, to look forward to all that was still to come. The robes were perfect. Madame Malkin had outdone herself. Each garment fitted precisely, the fabric soft and comfortable, the enchantments woven seamlessly into the weave. Rose's robes had the requested expansion-charmed pockets that could hold an impossible number of books. Albus's were so comfortable, they felt like he'd been wearing them for years. And Scorpius's robes hung just right, making him look older, more confident, like someone who belonged in this world without question. They left Madame Malkin's with packages that felt weighted with significance. These weren't just clothes. They were uniforms, declarations, the visible proof that they were becoming something new. The evening had deepened around them while they'd been inside. Diagon Alley had transformed in that peculiar way magical places do, the harsh afternoon light replaced by something gentler, more forgiving. Lanterns flickered to life along the street, casting warm pools of amber and gold. Shop windows glowed with enchanted displays that seemed designed for twilight viewing. And overhead, The sky had begun its slow gradient from blue to indigo, the first stars just visible between the ancient rooftops. But something else had changed too. Snow. Not heavy snow, not the blinding white of winter storms, but gentle flakes that drifted down from nowhere, or perhaps from everywhere, settling on cobblestones and awnings, dusting shoulders and hair with delicate precision. The snow didn't melt on contact. Instead, it accumulated in a thin, perfect layer that made Diagon Alley look like an illustration from a particularly beautiful children's book. Snow, Albus said, confused. But it's nearly September. Magical snow, Ginny explained, holding out her hand to catch a few flakes. The alley does this sometimes, especially on significant days. First-year shopping day qualifies. The snow remembers winter, remembers the cozy feeling of coming in from cold to warmth. It's atmospheric magic, the alley making itself match the mood. Rose caught snowflakes on her tongue, a gesture so childlike and unself-conscious that Hermione smiled. Scorpius watched the snow fall with quiet fascination, tracking individual flakes as they spiraled down through lamplight. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It is," Astoria agreed, her hand finding his shoulder. "The wizarding world does beauty well when it tries, remembers that magic should include wonder, not just utility." They walked through the gentle snowfall toward Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, which occupied a corner that seemed designed for exactly this purpose: rest, refreshment, reflection. The parlor had been destroyed during the war, Albus knew from his father's stories. Florian Fortescue himself had been taken by Death Eaters, had never returned. But the shop had been rebuilt, restored, made new while honoring what had been lost. The sign above the door read, "Florian Fortescue's Ice Cream Parlor, Eston, 1976. Rebuilt 1999. Forever serving joy." Below it, in smaller letters, "Dedicated to Florian, who believed ice cream could heal almost anything." Warm light spilled from the windows, and through them, Albus could see families gathered around small tables, children with ice cream-stained faces, parents looking tired but content. The shop promised sanctuary, a moment to breathe, a place where the overwhelming day could be processed in small, manageable portions. They pushed through the door, setting off chimes that played a cheerful melody. The interior was larger than it appeared from outside, not dramatically so, but comfortably spacious. Round tables scattered throughout, each with mismatched chairs that somehow worked together. The walls were painted in warm cream and soft pink, decorated with framed photographs of the original shop, of Florian himself, a cheerful wizard with a magnificent mustache, and of various Hogwarts houses celebrating victories with celebratory Sundays. Behind the counter, glass cases displayed dozens of flavors, some ordinary, many decidedly not. Labels promised traditional vanilla, chocolate explosion, butterbeer swirl, phoenix feather fusion, lavender and starlight, honeydukes special, pumpkin pasties and cream, and mysteriously, the Marauder's choice, changes daily. A young wizard behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Welcome, first years?" "That obvious?" Ron asked wryly. The shopping bags, the exhausted but happy expressions, the way the kids can't stop touching their wand boxes. The wizard grinned. "Been serving first-year families all day. You've earned your ice cream. Take your time deciding. I recommend trying samples if you're uncertain." They approached the counter in a group, and Albus found himself overwhelmed by choices. Too many flavors, too many possibilities. How did you choose when everything looked delicious. Start simple, Harry suggested quietly. You can always try something more adventurous next time. And there will be a next time. Christmas shopping, summer visits. This isn't your only chance. The words eased something in Albus's chest. Not his only chance, not his last opportunity. The magical world would still be here, would still welcome him, would still offer choices and possibilities, and moments of simple joy like ice cream on a September evening. Peppermint sundae, he decided, with chocolate shavings. Excellent choice, the wizard approved. Classic, refreshing, and the peppermint helps settle stomachs overwhelmed by too much shopping. Rose ordered something called Ravenclaw's Wisdom, a combination of blueberry, vanilla, and edible silver stars that supposedly enhanced mental clarity. Though Hermione quietly assured her this was marketing rather than actual magic. Ron ordered approximately half the shop's inventory, earning him fond exasperation from his wife. Scorpius chose Quiet Moon, pale ice cream that shimmered faintly, flavored with vanilla and lavender and something subtle he couldn't quite identify. They found tables near the back, 2 tables pushed together to accommodate their group. The families naturally separated slightly. Potters at one end, Weasleys in the middle, Malfoys at the other end, but all connected, all sharing the same space without the old tensions that would have made this impossible just years ago. The ice cream arrived in generous portions, served in glass dishes that maintained perfect temperature. Their ice cream stayed frozen while the glass remained comfortable to touch. Small enchantments, barely noticeable, but evidence of care and attention to detail. Albus took his first bite and closed his eyes. Cool peppermint exploded across his tongue, bright and clean and perfect. The chocolate provided contrast. Rich darkness against refreshing cold. It tasted like winter and celebration and comfort all mixed together. Good? Ginny asked, and Albus could only nod, his mouth too full for words. Around them, the parlor hummed with quiet conversation. Other families processed their own shopping days, compared purchases, made plans. But at their tables, a different kind of conversation was beginning. The kind that happens when the day's activities slow, when bodies rest and minds have room to reflect. I can't believe we're really going, Rose said softly, her spoon tracing patterns in her ice cream. To Hogwarts, I mean. It's been this future thing for so long, and now it's next week. Next week we'll be there. Terrifying, isn't it? Hermione said gently. But also wonderful. I remember my first day, completely overwhelmed, certain I'd made a terrible mistake, convinced everyone would realize I didn't belong. Then Professor McGonagall transfigured a desk into a pig and back again, and I thought, if this is what I get to learn, then whatever else happens, it'll be worth it. What if I'm not in Gryffindor? Albus asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing all day. Everyone expects. Dad was Gryffindor. Mum was Gryffindor. James is Gryffindor. What if I'm not? Harry set down his spoon and turned to face his son fully. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience, of understanding born from his own complicated history with houses and choice and belonging. Al, listen to me. The Sorting Hat wanted to put me in Slytherin. Did you know that? Albus's eyes widened. Really? Really? It told me I could be great, that Slytherin would help me on my way to greatness. But I asked, begged, really, to be anywhere else. I was 11, terrified, and the only thing I knew about Slytherin was that Voldemort had been in Slytherin. So the hat honored my choice and put me in Gryffindor. He paused, making sure Albus was listening. I've spent years thinking about that moment, wondering what would have happened if I'd chosen differently. And here's what I've learned. The hat doesn't just see what you are. It sees what you could become, what you value, what you'll need. Any house would be lucky to have you. And whatever house you end up in will be the right one, because it'll be yours. Your dad's right, Ron added. I was terrified I'd end up in Hufflepuff. Not because there's anything wrong with Hufflepuff, but because all my brothers were Gryffindor, and I wanted to be like them. But you know what? Percy was Gryffindor, and he spent years being a pompous git. House doesn't determine character. Choices do. What if people judge me? Albus pressed. What if they expect me to be like you, Dad, and I'm just not? Harry's expression softened with understanding and something that might have been old pain resurfacing. Then they'll be judging you for things you haven't done and can't control. Those people aren't worth your energy. Focus on the ones who see you, actually you, not your name or your family or their expectations. Those are the people who'll matter. Across the table, Scorpius had gone very quiet, his ice cream melting slightly as he stared at it without eating. Draco noticed, of course. His attention on his son was constant, careful, weighted with his own fears and hopes. What are you thinking? Draco asked, softly. Scorpius's voice was barely audible. What if I am in Slytherin? What if people think? What if they assume? He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Everyone at the table understood. Scorpius carried the Malfoy name, carried the weight of his father's choices, his grandfather's allegiance, a family history that was complicated at best and dark at worst. And Slytherin, fair or not, carried associations that the years since the war hadn't entirely erased. Then you'll show them who you actually are, Astoria said firmly. Not who they expect, not who they fear, but who you choose to be. Slytherin has produced some of the wizarding world's greatest minds, most cunning strategists, most ambitious innovators. It's also produced some of the darkest wizards. What matters isn't the house, it's what you do within it. My mother was Slytherin, Harry said suddenly, and everyone looked at him in surprise. Lily Evans, before she married my father. Brilliant witch, kind beyond measure, brave enough to sacrifice everything for her son. The hat considered Slytherin for her because she was clever and determined and fiercely protective. She ended up in Gryffindor, but she could have thrived anywhere. Really? Scorpius looked up, hope flickering across his face. She could have been Slytherin. Could have. Almost was. The point is, Scorpius, if you end up in Slytherin, you'll be in good company, and you'll have the chance to be part of changing what that house means, part of writing a new story about what Slytherin values can become in peacetime. The words hung in the air, and something shifted in the space between the families. Old boundaries, old prejudices, old fears, not gone, perhaps never entirely gone, but softened, made less solid, open to the possibility of being different. Rose had been listening to all of this while methodically eating her ice cream. Now she spoke up, her voice carrying the practical determination that was so characteristic of her. I think we should make a pact, she announced. The three of us. No matter what houses we're sorted into, we stay friends. Or at least, we try to be friends. We don't let house rivalries or other people's expectations or old histories determine how we treat each other. That's very idealistic, Scorpius said quietly. But there was longing in his voice, the desire to believe it could be that simple. Maybe, Rose agreed. But someone has to start. Someone has to decide that this generation will be different. Why not us? Albus looked at Rose. His cousin, his friend, brilliant and determined, and occasionally overwhelming but fundamentally kind. Then at Scorpius, still mostly a stranger, but someone who'd shared this day with them, who carried his own weight of expectation and fear, who'd shown unexpected depths in a herbology book and a quiet understanding of what it meant to be judged before you'd done anything to deserve judgment. Okay, Albus said, I'm in. Whatever houses, we try. Scorpius hesitated, glancing at his father. Draco's expression was complicated, surprise, concern, something that might have been hope he was afraid to acknowledge. But he nodded, just slightly, giving permission. Yes. Okay, we try. Excellent, Rose said, satisfied. She pulled out a napkin and a quill, because, of course, she had a quill with her. Let me document this properly. A pact requires documentation. Rose, you're writing our friendship pact on a napkin? Albus asked, amused. It's the principle that matters, not the medium. Besides, napkins can be preserved just as well as parchment. Better even, because they're more absorbent, so the ink. Just write it, Rosie, Ron interrupted fondly. Rose bent over the napkin, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration, as she wrote in her careful, precise script. We, the undersigned, hereby pledge that regardless of house sorting, family history, or external pressures, we will approach each other with fairness, attempt friendship in good faith, and refuse to let old prejudices dictate new relationships. Signed this day in Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, witnessed by Snowfall and Chocolate. She signed her name with a flourish, then passed the napkin to Albus, who added his signature, smaller, less confident, but present. Then to Scorpius, who stared at the napkin for a long moment before carefully writing his name below the others. 3 signatures, 3 children choosing, however tentatively, to try something different. Hermione's eyes were suspiciously bright. Harry looked like he might say something profound, then simply squeezed Ginny's hand instead. And Draco stared at his son's signature on that napkin, like it represented something precious and fragile and infinitely valuable. The moment stretched, held, then released as ordinary conversation resumed. But something had shifted, acknowledged, made possible. They finished their ice cream slowly, savoring both the flavors and the moment. The parlor had filled further as evening deepened. More families, more first years, more parents navigating the complex emotions of watching their children prepare to leave home. But at their tables, they existed in a bubble of contentment and cautious hope. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming Diagon Alley into something from a dream. Through the windows, they could see the street had emptied slightly, early shoppers heading home, the alley taking a breath between afternoon and evening crowds. We should head back soon, Hermione said reluctantly, checking the time. It's getting late, and we all have packing to finish. Packing, Rose repeated, and suddenly the reality hit her fully. We're actually leaving. In less than a week, we'll be on the Hogwarts Express. You'll be brilliant, Hermione assured her. All of you will. Nervous, probably, overwhelmed occasionally, but brilliant. They gathered their packages, so many bags, so many purchases, evidence of a day well spent and a future being prepared for. Wands and robes, books and potion ingredients, jokes and ice cream and memories wrapped up together in paper and string. As they stood to leave, the young wizard behind the counter called out, "Wait, first-year tradition, you get to sign the wall." He gestured to a section near the back, where the wall was covered in signatures and dates. Hundreds of names, maybe thousands, stretching back years. Evidence of every first year who'd stopped here, who'd marked their presence, who'd added their story to the long history of Hogwarts students preparing for their journey. One by one, they approached the wall. Rose signed first, her handwriting neat and precise, even with the awkward angle. Albus followed, his signature smaller, less certain. Scorpius went last, his elegant script a testament to years of careful penmanship training. Rose Granger Weasley, 1st September 2017. Albus Potter, 1st September 2017. Scorpius Malfoy. Since September 2017, 3 names joined by date and circumstance and the tentative promise of friendship. "There," the wizard said, satisfied. "Now you're part of the tradition. When you come back at Christmas, you'll be able to find your names, remember this day, and years from now, when you bring your own children for their first shopping trip, you'll show them where you signed. Tell them stories about your first day in the alley." The thought was both impossible and inevitable. That time would pass, that they'd grow up, that someday this would be memory rather than present experience. But for now, it was enough to simply be here, to have survived this overwhelming day, to stand on the threshold of everything about to begin. They stepped out into the snowy evening, and Diagon Alley wrapped around them one final time. The lamplight reflected off snowflakes, creating a softly glowing atmosphere that felt both magical and achingly real. Shop windows glowed with warm invitation, but the shopping was done. The day was complete. "Ready to go home?" Harry asked Albus quietly. Albus looked down the length of Diagon Alley, at the shops that had welcomed them, the cobblestones that had witnessed their journey, the magical space that existed between ordinary London and extraordinary possibility. He thought about his wand, carefully boxed and waiting, his robes perfectly fitted, the books he'd chosen and the friendships he'd tentatively begun. "Yeah," he said finally, "but I'm glad we came. I'm glad, all of this." "Me too," Harry said simply. "Me too." They walked back toward the leaky cauldron together. 3 families who'd started the day as separate entities and were ending it, if not quite united, at least moving in the same direction. The brick wall would seal behind them. The alley would continue its evening business. And tomorrow, the magical world would still be here, still waiting, still offering possibilities. But tonight, they carried pieces of it home with them, in their purchases and their memories, in the signatures on a wall and the pact on a napkin, in the snow that still dusted their shoulders like a blessing. The alley hummed behind them, satisfied with the day's work. 3 more children welcomed, 3 more stories begun, 3 more threads woven into the endless tapestry of magic and choice and becoming. And overhead, whether real or enchanted, stars began to appear in the deepening sky, constant witnesses to all the thresholds crossed, all the journeys begun, all the children who looked up at them and wondered what came next. The walk back to the leaky cauldron felt different from the morning's journey into the alley. Slower, perhaps, more contemplative. The energy of anticipation had been replaced by something gentler, satisfaction mixed with wistfulness, the particular melancholy that accompanies the end of something important. Their footsteps echoed on the cobblestones, the sound muffled slightly by the thin layer of magical snow that still fell in lazy spirals. The alley had taken on an ethereal quality in the deepening twilight, shop lights casting long rectangles of gold across the street, lanterns creating pools of warmth that pushed back against the encroaching night, the whole scene looking like something painted rather than real. Albus walked between his parents, his packages distributed between multiple bags that kept bumping against his legs. His wand box he carried separately, unable to quite let it out of his awareness. Every few steps, his hand would drift to it, confirming its presence, reassuring himself that it was real, that all of this had been real. Beside him, Rose was making mental calculations about how to pack everything into her trunk without exceeding the weight restrictions. She'd already begun organizing books by subject, muttering about the most efficient arrangement for quick access while maintaining proper weight distribution. "You know the trunks are enchanted, right?" Ron said, amused. "They're bigger on the inside. You could probably fit the entire library in there if you really wanted. But there are principles of organization that transcend available space," Rose insisted. "Just because you can throw everything in randomly doesn't mean you should." Hermione caught Ginny's eye, and they shared a smile. Recognition, amusement, the knowledge that some traits ran so strong in families that they transcended any attempts at guidance or intervention. Ahead of them, the Malfoys walked in their own small cluster. Scorpius held his herbology book, visible now, no longer hiding his interest, and he was speaking quietly to his mother about something. The words too soft to hear, but the animation in his voice clear enough. Astoria listened with the complete attention that suggested this was important, that her son's interests and discoveries mattered more than her own fatigue. Draco walked slightly apart, his eyes moving constantly. Old habits from dangerous times, the perpetual vigilance of someone who'd learned that threats could come from anywhere. But there was something different in his posture now, something softer than it had been that morning. His shoulders had relaxed slightly. His jaw wasn't quite so tight. Whatever he'd expected from this day, judgment, rejection, the cold shoulder from families who had reason to hate his, it hadn't materialized quite as he'd feared. They passed Ollivanders, its windows dark now, the shop closed for the evening. But even darkened, it emanated a sense of waiting. Thousands of wands still inside, each waiting for the right witch or wizard, each holding the potential for connection and power and choice. "Do you think the wands are lonely?" Albus asked suddenly. "The ones that haven't been chosen yet?" Harry considered the question seriously. "I think they're patient. They know their witch or wizard will come eventually. Some wands wait years, decades even, for the right match. But when it happens, when that connection is made..." He paused, remembering his own wand choosing, the warmth that had flooded through him when his fingers closed around holly and phoenix feather. When it happens, the waiting doesn't matter anymore. "That's very philosophical for someone who failed divination twice," Ginny teased. "I failed it 3 times. Thank you very much." And with conviction. Their laughter echoed off the ancient buildings, warm and human in the magical twilight. They passed the other shops, Flourish and Blotts, with its window display still moving, books arranging and rearranging in eternal patterns. The apothecary, with its mysterious scents, drifting out through cracks in the door. Quality Quidditch. Supplies with the Firebolt X, still rotating in majestic splendor. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, its windows bright with color and movement. The painted figures of Fred and George, still grinning their eternal mischief. George must have been watching from inside, because he appeared in the doorway, waving. Heading out, get home safe. And Rose, I want a full report on how those Peace Pop firecrackers perform in a dormitory setting. I'm not going to. Rose started, but George had already disappeared back inside, his laughter trailing behind him. You're totally going to test them, Ron predicted. I'm going to observe their effects in a controlled environment, Rose corrected primly. That's different from setting them off for entertainment purposes. Sure it is, sweetie. The leaky cauldron came into view, its crooked sign still, swinging gently in a breeze that might or might not have been natural, warm light spilling from its windows, the sound of conversation and clinking glasses drifting out into the street. It looked welcoming and ordinary, a bridge between the magical world and the Muggle one, serving that function for centuries. They paused at the boundary where Diagon Alley ended and the courtyard began, the invisible line that separated impossible from mundane, magic from ordinary. None of them spoke for a moment, each processing the day in their own way, each reluctant to take that final step that would end this experience. One more look, Albus suggested, quietly. They turned together, all of them, adults and children, Potters and Weasleys and Malfoys, and looked back at Diagon Alley spread before them. The street curved away into mystery, shops glowing like jewels set in ancient stone, the snow still falling in its gentle, impossible way, the whole scene so beautiful it hurt to look at. I want to remember this, Rose said softly. Exactly this. How it looks right now, how it feels. I want to remember that we were here together, that we did this. You will, Hermione promised. First days are always remembered. They mark you, change you, become part of your story. Years from now, you'll think back to today and remember standing right here, looking back at the alley, feeling everything you're feeling right now. Scorpius's voice was barely audible. Will it always be here? The alley, I mean? Will it always feel like this? It was Harry who answered, his voice carrying the weight of experience, of loss, of having seen the magical world at its darkest and watched it claw its way back to light. The alley will be here. It survived wars and dark wizards, fires and floods, centuries of change. Buildings might be rebuilt, shops might change hands, new generations will run old businesses. But the alley itself, the heart of it, the magic of it, that endures, that's the point. Places like this are anchors. They remind us that magic continues, that wonder persists, that no darkness is permanent. He paused, then added more quietly, as for whether it will always feel like this, no, it'll feel different next time. Better in some ways, more ordinary in others. The magic of first times can't be repeated, but you'll find new kinds of magic. Familiarity can be just as powerful as wonder in its own way. You'll walk these streets knowing where everything is, having favorites, being recognized by shopkeepers. That has its own beauty. Draco had been silent throughout this exchange, but now he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. He didn't quite hide. I came here for my first school shopping too. My father brought me. He had specific ideas about how the day should go what I should buy, how I should behave. I remember feeling like I was playing a part, performing rather than experiencing. He looked at Scorpius, and his expression was vulnerable in a way Draco Malfoy rarely allowed himself to be. Today was different. Today you got to choose your own books, discover your own interests, make your own connections. That's what I wanted for you, that freedom. Astoria's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. And he had it. They all did. The moment stretched, held in the gentle snowfall and lamplight, all of them suspended between ending and beginning, between past and future, between the alley and home. Finally, inevitably, they had to move, had to take those final steps, walk through the courtyard, enter the leaky cauldron's warm interior, and prepare to leave the magical world behind until the Hogwarts Express departed in less than a week. But before they did, Rose pulled out her wand, and raised it slightly, not casting a spell, just holding it, acknowledging it, making a moment ceremonial through simple gesture. "To Diagon Alley," she said softly. "Thank you for welcoming us." Albus drew his wand too, feeling its weight, its rightness in his hand. Scorpius followed, the three of them standing with wands raised, a salute to the street that had given them so much. The alley seemed to respond. The snow swirled more deliberately, the lamplight brightened slightly, and for just a moment, every shop window glowed a little warmer, a little brighter, as though the street itself was acknowledging them in return. "You're welcome," it seemed to say. "Come back soon. We'll be waiting." They lowered their wands, carefully tucked them away, and turned toward the courtyard. The brick wall would close behind them, sealing the alley off from Muggle London, keeping the magical world safely hidden, perpetually protected. Inside the leaky cauldron, the evening crowd had gathered, witches and wizards unwinding after work, travellers stopping for a meal before continuing their journeys, the occasional Muggle who'd stumbled in through the portal on Charing Cross Road, looking confused and slightly overwhelmed. Tom the innkeeper nodded at them from behind the bar, the same nod he'd given that morning, the same nod he'd given hundreds of first-year families before them. Recognition without fuss. Welcome without ceremony. They made their way through the pub's crowded interior toward the front entrance, the door that would lead them back to ordinary London, to King's Cross Station and the Underground, to homes and normal lives that would continue for a few more days before everything changed. At the threshold between magical and Muggle London, Harry paused. He pulled out his wand and tapped the brick wall gently, not opening it, just touching it, a gesture of acknowledgement or perhaps gratitude. "What are you doing?" Albus asked. "Saying goodbye. I always do. This place." Harry's voice caught slightly. "This place saved me, gave me magic when I thought I'd never escape the Dursleys, showed me I belonged somewhere. Every time I leave, I say goodbye properly. Thank it for still being here." Albus understood. He touched the wall too, his palm flat against cool brick that hummed with barely perceptible magic. "Goodbye," he whispered. "Thank you. I'll come back." "I know," the wall seemed to respond. "We're waiting." They stepped out into Muggle London, and the transition was jarring. Car engines and exhaust fumes, the rumble of buses and underground trains, the particular smell of city, all of it crashed over them like a wave. The gentle snow vanished instantly, replaced by ordinary September evening coolness. The lamplight became harsh fluorescent street lamps. The magic drained away, leaving only memory. but they carried it with them. In their packages and their wands, in the signatures on a wall and the pact on a napkin, in the new knowledge of what existed just beyond sight, hidden but never truly gone. The families prepared to part ways. The Weasleys would apparate home to their cottage in Devon. The Potters would take the night bus back to Grimmauld Place, and the Malfoys would use the Floo network from a nearby magical access point. But before separating, the three children looked at each other. 3 11-year-olds who'd shared something significant, who'd made promises they weren't sure they could keep, but wanted desperately to try. "See you on the express?" Rose asked. "Platform 9 3/4, 11 o'clock, 1st of September, Albus confirmed. "I'll be there," Scorpius said quietly. Then, more firmly, "I'll find you. We'll sit together, maybe. If that would be okay." "It would be perfect," Rose said decisively. "We'll save you a compartment." The parents watched this exchange with varying expressions. Hermione openly delighted, Ron cautiously approving, Harry quietly moved, Ginny satisfied, Draco struggling with emotions too complex to name, Astoria simply hopeful. They said their goodbyes, formal handshakes and polite words, but underneath, something warmer, something that acknowledged they'd shared this day, this experience, this small rebellion against old hatreds and inherited prejudices. The Weasleys disapparated first, with soft cracks that made nearby muggles glance around in confusion before forgetting what had caught their attention. The Malfoys disappeared into a side alley where a discreet Floo access point waited, and the Potters stood alone on Charing Cross Road, surrounded by hurrying muggles who had no idea that magic existed just beyond that unremarkable door, behind that forgettable pub. "Ready to go home?" Ginny asked, summoning the night bus with a raised wand. Albus thought about home, his room at Grimmauld Place, familiar and comfortable, where he'd spent the last 11 years. In less than a week, he'd leave it behind for Hogwarts, for dormitories and common rooms, for a new kind of home he'd have to learn to navigate. "Yeah," he said, "but I'm glad we came today. I'm glad we did this." "Me too," Harry said, his hand warm on Albus's shoulder. "Me too." The night bus appeared, with a bang that made several muggles jump, purple and outrageous, and impossible to miss. They climbed aboard with their packages, found seats in the chaos of the triple-decker interior, and prepared for the lurching, nauseating journey home. As the bus pulled away from the curb with a lurch that sent packages sliding, Albus looked back at the street they were leaving. To Muggle eyes, it was just Charing Cross Road. Shops and traffic, ordinary city street, nothing special. But he knew better now. He knew what existed beyond that unremarkable door, behind that forgettable pub. A whole world of magic and wonder, of shops that sold impossible things, of streets that remembered centuries of witches and wizards, of spaces that welcomed newcomers and held them safe while they discovered who they might become. Diagon Alley was there, would always be there, waiting. Back in the alley, the evening deepened toward night. Shopkeepers closed their registers and shuttered their windows. The last customers hurried home, packages clutched tight. The magical snow began to fade, its purpose served, dissipating into the air like a pleasant dream upon waking. Ollivanders stood silent and watchful, thousands of wands waiting in darkness for the next witch or wizard who would need choosing. Flourish and Blotts settled into evening quiet, books whispering to each other in languages only they understood. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes dimmed its lights but left the window displays running. Fred and George still grinning their painted grins, eternal in their mischief, permanent in their joy. The apothecary locked its dangerous ingredients behind extra wards, protection for a world that had learned the hard way that some magics required careful guarding. Quality, Quidditch, supplies, set alarm charms, and retired its Firebolt X to storage, preserving perfection for tomorrow's customers. And Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor cleaned its dishes and wiped down tables, the wall of signatures waiting for the next first year to add their name to history. The cobblestones themselves seemed to settle, satisfied with the day's work. 3 more children welcomed, 3 more stories begun, 3 more threads woven into the endless tapestry of Hogwarts, of magic, of all the ways young witches and wizards learn to become themselves. The alley knew, as it had always known, that they would return. At Christmas for holiday shopping, in summer for new books and supplies, years from now with their own children, showing them the shops, telling them stories, pointing to signatures on a wall and saying, "There, that's where I signed. That's where it all began." Magic was a cycle, an endless turning, a story that had no final chapter because each ending was also a beginning. And Diagon Alley stood at the center of that cycle, ancient and enduring, witness to countless first days, countless transformations, countless moments when everything changed and stayed the same all at once. The stars emerged fully now, winter constellations visible despite the season, because the alley's magic made its own rules about time and space and possibility. They wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns, Orion the hunter, Cassiopeia in her chair, Draco the dragon winding across the northern sky, watching as they'd watched for millennia, as they'd watch for millennia more. Somewhere in London, 3 children prepared for bed, their shopping bags unpacked, their purchases examined and re-examined with wonder that hadn't faded. 3 sets of robes hung in wardrobes, waiting. 3 wands rested in their boxes, dreaming whatever dreams wands dream. 3 signatures marked a wall, permanent and proud, evidence of existence and choice and the beginning of something that might become friendship or might become nothing, but at least held the possibility of both. And in the quiet darkness of Diagon Alley, the street hummed with contentment. The day was complete. The children had been welcomed. The cycle continued. The brick wall stood sealed and patient, guarding its secret, keeping magic safe from curious muggle eyes. But it wasn't closed, not really. Never closed. Just waiting. Always waiting. For the next first-year family to arrive with lists and anticipation. For the next witch or wizard to push through the leaky cauldron and gasp at their first sight of the impossible. For the next child to hold a wand and feel it choose them, to try on robes and realize they're becoming someone new, to sign their name on a wall and claim their place in a story larger than themselves. The alley waited because that's what it did. That's what it had always done. That's what it would always do. Time passed in its strange, circular way. Days became weeks. The 1st of September arrived, inevitable as sunrise, bringing with it the Hogwarts Express and tearful goodbyes, and children trying very hard to look brave, while their parents tried very hard not to cry. Platform 9 and 3/4, filled with families, with trunks and owls and cats, with nervous first years and confident 7th years, with the organized chaos of term beginning. And among the crowd, 3 children found each other, kept the promise they'd made over ice cream and signatures, carved out a compartment where they could sit together, share sweets from the trolley, and wonder what house they'd be sorted into, and whether the pact on a napkin would survive the reality of Hogwarts politics. But that was another story, for another day. For now, in the quiet evening of Diagon Alley, the street settled into patient waiting, content with its work, satisfied with its welcome, ready for tomorrow's customers, tomorrow's first years, tomorrow's moments of transformation and wonder. The children did not yet know it, but the alley had been waiting for them. And now that they'd come, now that they'd been welcomed, now that they'd discovered the magic that existed beyond ordinary sight, the alley would wait for them to return, as it always did, as it always would, forever.